inspiration to promote the holistic transformation of your health and the health of our planet. I'm your host, Dr. Benjamin Alter, and thanks again for being with me here on another special, unique episode of the Alter Your Health podcast. Today, I'm going to be going over the last 14 interviews that I've conducted on the Alter Your Health podcast. These are episodes 22 to 50, where I've interviewed all sorts of unique and amazing people, and so I'm going to be getting right into it with episode 22, and that was with Dr. Satya Ambrose, who is a naturopathic physician and acupuncturist based out of the Portland area. She has been really a trailblazer in both the fields of naturopathic medicine and Chinese medicine, and she's founded the Oregon College of Oriental Medicine in Portland, Oregon, and she's served as a mentor to so many young doctors, physicians, naturopathic and Chinese medicine doctors, including myself. And I've had the privilege and honor of witnessing her mastery at work in her clinical practice, and she supports people from healing all sorts of chronic conditions, really complex stuff that she's a master of. And she is also just a fun and unique and special individual. And in our conversation, Dr. Ambrose and I talked about the evolution of medicine and science and how it's impacted and influenced her career. We talked about what she sees moving forward in terms of further integration of conventional and alternative naturopathic medicine. We talk about some of the inspiring healing stories that she's witnessed and observed in her clinical practice over the last several decades, using natural remedies to support people in their healing process. And we finally talk about some of her own personal pearls for living a healthy and happy life. She's been walking her walk and talking her talk for many decades, and she shares some of her wisdom that she's cultivated in her years of experience treating and supporting people holistically with naturopathic medicine. And the title of this episode was Functional Medicine Before It Was Cool and Healing Stories. And the reason why I titled this episode Functional Medicine Before It Was Cool, because I think more and more people are becoming aware of functional medicine, and it is becoming, I don't want to say trendy, because it really is great what all the functional medicine doctors are doing, but it is gaining exposure. And the fact of the matter is that naturopathic doctors were doing or practicing functional medicine for decades before the term functional medicine even existed. So functional medicine is a way for conventionally trained doctors to think and practice more holistically and naturopathically using functional medicine wisdom and knowledge and testings that have been cultivated and developed in more recent years. So yeah, Dr. Ambrose kind of talks about what she's been doing for decades before it was called functional medicine. Really great stuff that she's continuing to do. You can find more about Dr. Ambrose and this conversation by visiting alter.health/episode 22. And the next interview that I'm sharing with you on this podcast is How to Be a Healthy Yogi with Arvind Chitta. Arvind was my first real traditional meditation teacher when I was living in the Los Angeles area in Venice, California. And Arvind is a yogi. He is born and raised in central India, and he has been living in the US and in Los Angeles area for, I don't know, a couple decades now, I presume. And he is really grounded and rooted in the traditional teachings of yoga. And this conversation was all about yoga beyond the asana, because asana is just one limb of the 8-limb path of Raja Yoga. And so we talk a little bit about the other limbs that are often overlooked when we use the word yoga in our modern society. We talk about how cultivating awareness and understanding of yoga as the holistic art and science as it is, cultivating an understanding of it can really support people in cultivating a more deep connection with their own holistic health and well-being. So I just wanted to go over the other limbs of yoga that we did talk about in this conversation with Arvind. I wanted to go over them with you now. So the yamas are the restraints or moral disciplines or moral vows that we take in honoring ourselves and our loved ones on the planet. And these include ahimsa, which is nonviolence, not harming other living beings; satya, which is truthfulness and non-falsehood, telling the truth; asteya, which is not stealing; brahmacharya, which is chastity, marital fidelity, or sexual restraint, but that also translates beyond sexual brahmacharya. Aparigraha is non-avarice, non-possessiveness, not being attached to physical things. So those are the yamas, the restraints or moral disciplines. And then there's the niyamas, which are duties or observances. So saucha is purity, clearness of mind, speech, and body. Santosha is contentment, acceptance of others and one's circumstances as they are. Tapas is austerity, self-discipline, persistent meditation, perseverance. Svadhyaya, which is one of my favorite words to say, is self-study, self-reflection, introspection. And then Isvari Pranidhana, which is contemplation of God, or the supreme consciousness, really just contemplating our existence, that sort of thing. So those are the yamas and the niyamas. And then we get into the asana, which is obviously the yoga as we know it today in our world, in our society. And then there's pranayama, which is breath work techniques, breathing techniques; pratyahara, which is sense withdrawal; and dharana, which is focused concentration; and dhyana, which is meditative absorption. So pratyahara, dharana, and dhyana are all kind of aspects of a meditation practice. So those are 5, 6, and 7 of the eight limbs of the Eightfold Path of Yoga. And then there's samadhi, which is the 8th limb, and that is bliss or enlightenment. So all of these 8 limbs of the 8-limb path of Raja Yoga are pointing us in the direction of samadhi, bliss, enlightenment. And while that isn't necessarily a lot of our goals in this human existence, it is our potential opportunity, is bliss or enlightenment. And we can use all of these practices, including our asana, to point us in the direction of, freedom, bliss, enlightenment. And if that doesn't sum up health, I don't know what does. So this conversation was all about all of these subtle aspects of yoga that might have been forgotten in more recent times, but are very much an important part of a holistic yoga practice to support health. For more on Arvind and more on this conversation, which was a great one, you can go to alter.health/episode 24. And we also talk about a couple of Arvind's projects, which include the making of a documentary, which is available on Netflix. That's called Yoga Maya. We also talk about the spiritual center that Arvind has built and cultivated north of Los Angeles, and that's the Moksha Spiritual Center. And we talk about the Moksha Spiritual Festival, which is something that has taken place for a few years now. I think he's been off of it for a couple of years, but I know that this year there's going to be another Moksha Festival. So for more, go to alter.health/episode 24. And this brings us to episode 26, and this conversation was with Dr. Glenn Nagel, and we talked all about the magical properties of cannabis and other weeds. And Dr. Nagel is one of my botanical medicine teachers that I had while studying naturopathic medicine, and he is a lively, entertaining, funny kind of guy, and that's the tone that this conversation took with Dr. Nagel as we traversed all things related to cannabis and the cannabis industry. And we talk about other weeds or herbs that fit under the realm of botanical medicine. We talk about the physiological effects of a lot of herbs and botanical remedies, and we talk about more energetic effects of some herbs and remedies. And we talk about how it's important to acknowledge and understand both the physiological and the energetic effects of herbs and remedies when addressing health and using herbs to promote health. So I really like what Dr. Nagel says regarding these herbs and botanical remedies that have been used for thousands of years in traditional healing settings. And he talks about herbs being used to kind of nudge the body in the direction of health. And while some of them do have more powerful physiologic effects, such as cannabis, for example, a lot of the other botanical remedies do have strong effects, but not as strong, and they need to be taken more regularly, and they're not really designed to completely transform physiology the way that pharmaceutical drugs are, but they more nudge the body gently. So our conversation is all about that. Dr. Nagel shares some of his stories with herbs, which are fun, some of his favorite herbs to work with, to use, and how we can incorporate herbs and botanical remedies into our everyday lives beyond just taking, capsules or tinctures or things like that. So a great conversation with Dr. Nagel. If you want to learn more about him and give it a listen, go to alter.health/episode 26. Episode 28 was a very, very special and, in my opinion, one of the most important interviews that I've conducted on the Alter Your Health podcast. And this one was with Dr. Stylish Rao. We talked about the solution for world hunger, climate change, and violence. And we talk about that, yes, this solution does exist, and it has existed since the beginning of time. And Dr. Rao really brings a unique and interesting perspective to the matter, with a background in systems engineering and electrical engineering, and actually being one of the creators of the internet decades ago. Dr. Rao really understands the inner workings of systems. So he does see a solution from a different perspective than maybe a lot of us might have. And we talk about this perspective, and this brings us to the topic, of course, of veganism, which really is the solution to world hunger, climate change, and violence. And we talk about how that's just the case. We talk about how taking a step to veganism from vegetarianism is really a powerful step that one can take. And we talk about how and why the system that we live in today is really based on normalized violence. And from politics to economics to food, it's all violence oriented. And we talk about how the alternative, the new paradigm, the new system is based on normalized nonviolence, and that's veganism. So obviously veganism, the V word, carries a lot of weight. It's a very emotionally triggering word for a lot of people in this world. I know it has been for me in my life. And the fact of the matter is that veganism means that we don't unnecessarily harm or cause the suffering of other beings, other living beings on this planet. And from that definition, Dr. Rao argues that we're all vegan at heart. And the fact of the matter is we're all just coming into alignment with our actions and our truest beliefs that are rooted in the core of who we are. So we talk about how it's important to align these beliefs with our actions in order to be aligned and really on track. We didn't really talk about it too much in this conversation, but the fact of the matter is that veganism and eating plants and not eating animals doesn't need to be restricting or difficult or unsatisfying in any way. We're not talking about restricting satisfaction out of lives. We're just talking about being compassionate towards other living animals, being compassionate towards ourselves, being compassionate towards friends, family, loved ones. So great conversation about compassion, and really, really an important episode. Like I said, I would highly encourage all of you to go back and listen to alter.health/episode 28 with Stylish Rao. If you do feel inspired, this is a great one to share with all friends and family who are maybe curious about what veganism really is. So this is a really, really great episode, and tune in for more. And episode 30 was with Dr. Ben Reeves, a classmate of mine at the National College of Natural Medicine, now National University of Natural Medicine. Dr. Reeves is a Portland-based naturopathic doctor, And in this conversation, we talk about quantum physics, vitalism, individualized healthcare, and it was indeed a fun conversation. Dr. Ben and I have a lot of interests, of course, that overlap, and I really enjoyed how this conversation was kind of a collaborative, brainstorming sort of thing where we talked about all sorts of good, important, juicy stuff relating to vitalism in medicine and what vitalism really is and how vitalism is real and it's not some woo-woo concept. One thing that I took away from this conversation is how Dr. Ben talked about how we are waves and we're not particles, and this comes into the quantum physics idea of waves versus particles. And being a wave, we are continuously moving and changing, and we're so dynamic in nature. And it's important for healthcare providers, doctors, to understand the ever-changing dynamic nature of human beings. And, this is hard to do, maybe impossible to do, but just acknowledging that we are waves, not just particles, is really an important thing to do. And another takeaway is that, of course, that being said, there's no one size fits all approach to health, to medicine. There's no one protocol to treat disease X, Y, or Z. These sort of protocols and these sort of healthcare regimens need to be tailored to individuals, and that's where real, sustainable, successful medical treatment comes in. And our system, of course, is based on these protocols that sometimes I use the word like monkey medicine, because a monkey could do the sort of medicine that is done in conventional practice. And, no harsh words against conventional doctors. They're not monkeys, of course. They're smart people. But in terms of the protocols that are delivered by conventional doctors, it really is just, an algorithm that we plug into a computer, and symptom X and symptom Y, and this is what they've done in the past, and this is what they're experiencing now. And there's like the best treatment for them based on all of this data. And real, sustainable, curative medicine does not involve algorithms as does, these conventional protocols. So these are some takeaways from the conversation that I had with Dr. Ben Reeves. For more, of course, go to alter.health/episode 30. Okay, episode 32, we come back to nutrition. We come back to plant-based eating with plant-based nutritionist and performance nutritionist Wilfredo Benitez. And Will is another classmate from the National University of Natural Medicine. He was in the Masters of Nutrition program while I was studying naturopathic medicine. And Will is a performance athlete, an endurance runner, and he is passionate about supporting athletes and achieving their highest performance. And of course, one of the things needed to do that is adequate, proper nutrition. So we talk about all sorts of things related to fueling oneself optimally for performance purposes. And the way to do that is with plants. And the reason why that is because plants provide both the energy requirements, the calories, the carbohydrates, which are the calories that our muscles burn for fuel, and also the micronutrients and all the phytochemicals that are important for recovery and repair. And, it's no different than eating for health, because really, if we're performance athletes or if we're interested in our exercise achievements, then it's important to just fuel oneself as they would for health, but just even be that more focused on what the importance of what's going into the body. Because it's like, if you think about, you're driving a car and you have your city car that you drive around, you drive around town, and you need to fuel that city car with the proper fuel. But if you are a performance athlete, then it's like, then you're driving a Lamborghini or something, or, some sports car that goes really fast that requires even more fuel and more of the proper type of fuel. So a lot of people are under the interpretation that if you exercise a lot, then it's okay. You can get away with eating more junk food, eating more calorically dense and nutrient deficient food because you're just going to burn through it. But that's not the case. And we talk about why that is in this conversation with Wilfredo Benitez. We talk about some pearls that he has in terms of muscle recovery and muscle healing. And those were some questions that I have because those personally, I do struggle with muscle soreness after exercise. So it was a great reminder that maybe I'm deficient in some things. So for more on Will Benitez and his in this conversation, go to alter.health/episode 32. Episode 34 was with Dr. Greg Nye, a Portland-based naturopathic doctor, really a genius as far as I'm concerned. And we talk about all sorts of alternative views in alternative medicine. And yes, even in alternative medicine, there are alternative views of all sorts of things. So that's where Greg Nye lives. He lives in the alternative of the alternative. And we talk about why it's important to live there, why it's important to spend some time, I don't like using this term, but thinking outside of the box, because inside of the box, everything has already been discovered and we can't get anywhere by just throwing around ideas that are already inside of the box. And we need to push the limits of our understanding. We need to question things. We need to understand things on a deeper level in order to evolve medicine and healthcare. And that's what Greg does in his free time, in his spare time. He's always learning, always reading. And in this conversation, we talk about specifically some alternative ideas when it comes to SIBO, which is a very common gastrointestinal diagnosis, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. We also talk about alternative views to cancer. One thing that I really appreciated from this conversation was the alternative view that Greg provides with regard to the cell. We talk about how the cell, as we all know it today, as is drawn in our basic biology textbook with a cellular membrane and all these channels and pores and things coming in and out of these transporters and stuff. We talk about how that's probably not the case, how our cells are really working. What is actually probably the case is that things are much more dynamic and fluid, and there's really not this physical barrier that we're all familiar with from looking at the pictures in our biology textbook. It's probably much more fluid. And so if that's the case, if the very building block of human beings, the cell, is not as we have initially thought for all of these decades, maybe even hundreds of years, then if the cell is different than we initially thought, then maybe we need to rethink all sorts of other things when it comes to our understanding of health and disease. So that's really a theme that plays out through this conversation with Greg Nye. He, like I said, he's a brilliant guy, and it's always fun to connect with him. I've done a lot of learning with him. I encourage you, if you're a brainiac sort of person, if you like to understand things on a deep level, I would encourage you to check out this one, alter.health/episode 34. And in episode 36, I connect with Drs. Ron and Mary Holnick, my old teachers of my spiritual psychology program. And it was such a pleasure to sit down with them in this sort of setting. I feel so connected and close with them as they have been my teachers for a few years in class. And this last year I was serving on faculty at a program at the University of Santa Monica where they teach. So I did feel like I was able to connect with them a little bit more intimately. But in this conversation, I feel like I was really able to sit them down and talk about things that I've been wanting to talk about with them for years. And that was a great opportunity, and I really appreciated that conversation that we did have. And we talked about how cultivating a spiritual perspective, how cultivating a spiritual connection rather, and how understanding what Drs. Ron and Mary call the spiritual context can have a great support in our holistic healing, having an understanding of what's going on in this physical world and what the opportunities really are. can really support us in healing physically. And obviously, we talk about the multi-dimensional nature of human beings being physical bodies, but having mental, emotional, and spiritual dimensions to who we are. We talk about the principles of spiritual psychology and how these principles, like I said, can cultivate and strengthen our resilience when it comes to navigating this crazy physical world. And we talk about different ways that I use this word of spiritual fitness, maintaining spiritual fitness in our world, and how practices and techniques can help us maintain a level of spiritual fitness that can add to that resilience of who you are. So it was a great conversation with Drs. Ron and Mary Holnick. I really appreciated their wisdom and their sharing of their decades of experience in the field of spiritual psychology. And for more, of course, go to alter.health/episode 36 and tune in with Drs. Ron and Mary Holnick. And episode 38 was with Michael Bryan Baker. We talked all about shamanism, pranayama, breath work, and even a little bit about plant medicine, ayahuasca. We only dabbled a little bit in ayahuasca, or not in it, but the conversation dabbled in it, just because that isn't something that Michael focuses all that much on anymore. But Michael has been a friend and mentor of mine for many years. He's really a special guy who's, I was first introduced to Michael and his work in a breathwork ceremony at a yoga festival. Actually, it was Arvind's yoga festival, the Moksha Festival in Santa Monica, where I met Michael Bryan Baker, and I was just struck by his presence from the first time I met him. He really just, he takes up some space in a room and you feel him, he's that kind of guy. And the breath work that he led me through and led the group through was impactful. And I had never felt anything like that in my physical body. And it allowed me to transcend out of my physical body just for a moment, as I got tingly in my extremities. I did have a little bit of an out-of-body experience. I went on to work with Michael and learn from Michael, and I even lived with Michael for several months in Los Angeles. So he's just a very close, dear friend of mine, and I love the opportunity to reconnect with him in this conversation all about the work that he has been doing for over 10 years now, and the evolution of his work, how he has, learned this really powerful breathwork technique. But he didn't stop there. He has continued to weave different elements and understanding and knowledge and wisdom and experience to strengthen really the offering that he is giving the world and giving the planet. We talk about how the shamanic elements get woven into the breathwork practice. And we also talk about, like I said, the plant medicine aspect, as it was a larger part of what he did with people in ceremony. And now the breathwork ceremonies that he's able to cultivate and offer people really do offer a similar sort of profound transformational experience that one might experience with plant medicine like ayahuasca. So we talk about how he's, using all of these things to cultivate and create this alchemical sort of experience for so many people. And Michael is really an engaging, unique, fun guy, and loved connecting with him, and really encourage you to go back and listen to this one, alter.health/episode 38. All right, episode number 40 was with Dr. Joel Kahn, and we talk all about vegan nutrition for ageless living, of course, as Dr. Kahn is a plant-based cardiologist, and he has been using nutrition to support the reversal and prevent cardiovascular disease, and he really is an expert on the topic. And this conversation was all about what he does, in addition to some of the newer things that are becoming revealed in our world today in terms of nutrition and plant-based eating. And specifically, we talked about caloric restriction and fasting mimicking diets, and how these sort of things, when done on an ongoing basis, can be some of the most powerful ways to not only reverse the disease, but also reverse the aging process, as if that's actually possible, which science says it actually is, which is pretty amazing. So this conversation with Dr. Khan was right after the Joe Rogan podcast, which was a popular conversation that he had with Chris Kresser when they were debating the vegan versus paleo thing. So we also talk a little bit about that debate, that experience, what was maybe left unsaid, or some things that were still confusing or unsettled from that experience, that conversation. So Dr. Joel Kahn is really a fun guy. He's up to a lot of stuff, including his fantastic vegan restaurant outside of Detroit, in the suburbs of Detroit, Green Space Cafe. So he's written all sorts of books, and like I said, always up to something new. So if you want to learn more about Dr. Khan, tune into this one, alter.health/episode 40. Episode 42 was with Dr. Joan Borisenko. We talk all about mind-body medicine and cultivating resilience. A really great conversation with Dr. Borisenko. I had the opportunity to visit her in person in her home in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And so this was recorded there. On this trip, we also connected with the guest of episode number 46 that we're going to get to in just a moment. But Dr. Borisenko, who lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico, is really a pioneer in the whole mind-body medicine field. And we talk about her story, her healing story from when she was a young girl, and how that experience really did dictate her path into the world. And as she told it, it just struck me that there was really no choice for her. This is her path. And she is living her path, and she is sharing her path and her experience, and touching so many in the process. She's written tons of books, lots of bestsellers and these sort of things. And she continues to, lead workshops and retreats and teachings of all sorts. It really was just a wonderful time connecting with Joan in her home. And we talk about the evolution of mind-body medicine. We talk about cultivating resilience and how that can be such a valuable asset, not only for your physical health and healing process, but for emotional health and healing, of course. And we talk about practices aside from mindfulness that might be valuable in cultivating and supporting and promoting health, which of course we know these are all aspects of our life, from nutrition to exercise and that sort of thing. So good stuff from Dr. Joan Borisenko. And if you'd like to learn more, would love to point you in the direction of this one, alter.health/episode 42. And we interrupt the interview with outsiders and professionals outside of the Alter Health clan to go inside the Alter Health clan, specifically with Dr. Susanna Alter. Episode 44 was me and Susanna talking about relationships, because, we've been married for 8 months now. So we're obviously the world-renowned experts on relationships. That's a joke, of course, but the fact of the matter is we do feel like we have a unique perspective when it comes to living a relationship, one that doesn't shy away from conflict. Specifically, we view conflict as opportunity, and we don't see conflict as a bad thing. And we talk about in this conversation how resolving conflict can bring us closer together, and how really communication is a key for, mastering conflict resolution to maintain peace. We talk about how our individual moment-to-moment thoughts and feelings can have a strong interplay with our partners, and how it's important to just notice the moment-to-moment, ever-changing nature of our individual thoughts and emotions, and give our partner the flexibility and freedom to experience the moment-to-moment change in their thoughts and emotions as well. And in doing so, we just naturally find equilibrium and naturally allow peace to be experienced from the ground up, as that is the foundation of who we are. So this one, obviously a little different than our previous episodes where I'm interviewing different people. It's just me and Susanna talking about our relationship. So we talk about how we met. We talk about conflict resolution. Like I said, we talk about the purpose of relationships, as I kind of alluded to. It is the purpose of relationship is to grow personally and together. And we talk about all sorts of other things in this one. So if you want to know more juicy details about my relationship with Dr. Susanna, head over to alter.health/episode 44. And episode 46, we are back in New Mexico for this one. Our other guest that I interviewed while we were traveling in New Mexico is Dr. Larry Darcy. Dr. Darcy is another pioneer in the whole mind-body medicine field, and he has written some phenomenal books that I've really enjoyed. His latest is called The One Mind, or One Mind, not The One Mind. And this interview was all about one mind and how one mind can actually be used in healing. We talk about Dr. Darcy's introduction into mind-body medicine. We talked about his chronic migraines that he experienced while he was in medical school and how he healed those using biofeedback. We talk about what biofeedback is and how it can be a powerful tool to support us in connecting with ourselves, in connecting with our own inherent self-healing potential, as I like to see. And we talk about the one mind and how the one mind influences health and healing. One thing that I really appreciated is how the one mind can be used both as a diagnostic technique. And what I mean by that is the one mind can influence our own intuition. And there are plenty of countless stories of how people have just been attuned to what's going on in their body and thought, man, something's a little whack. And they'd go in for a scan or a checkup. And sure enough, there would be cancer in their body. So that's one way that this connection with one mind and intuition can support the medical field in proper diagnosis of medical conditions. And then on the other side of things, the one mind can also be a powerful treatment strategy. And what I mean by that is that connecting with the one mind is really connecting with universal love and the love that we have in each one of us. And that love, to me, is our innate healing potential. And if we can point people towards connecting with that innate healing potential, then to me, that's the most immune boosting, health promoting strategy that we could ever implement. It's more powerful than any diet. It's more powerful than any juice or supplement. And if we can point people to connect with that powerful healing potential inside of themselves, which is the one mind, then we can really revolutionize healthcare. So lastly, in this conversation, Dr. Darcy shares his 4-step way to access the one mind and the power that the one mind provides. And I really like Dr. Darcy's 4-step method. I'll just give you a hint. It's really easy and you can do it now. So for more on Dr. Larry Darcy in this conversation, head over to alter.health/episode 46. Episode 48 was with Steve Behrman, aka Swami Beyond Ananda. That's right, Swami Beyond Ananda, if you are curious to what's coming out of my mouth. And that's his stage name. Steve is a cosmic comic, as he calls it. And we talk about cosmic comedy. And what I take away from this conversation is how cosmic comedy is really the antidote to stress. And stress is an epidemic in our world today. I mean, everyone is stressed all the time. That's just the nature of reality. And comedy is a way to totally diffuse the stress bomb that's going off inside each and every one of us, as I see it. Having a connection with our own inner comedian can be achieved, and it can be a way to de-stress our life on a moment-to-moment basis. And we talk about how one can achieve that connection with our own inner comic. And one thing that I learned, as I do personally sometimes feel like I struggle with gaining a comedic perspective on things, sometimes it helps to make things totally crazy. So if I feel very stubborn and determined to find the solution to a problem, which can really stress me out and make me go crazy, if I go even above and beyond and just create a character that's even more stubborn and determined, if that exists, I guess we'll play around and see. But if I can just make it totally exaggerated, then I can maybe have a glimmer of insight into how ridiculous I might be acting. And that's all it really takes. And that's one thing that I love and gathered from this conversation with Steve, is how comedy can have a way of separating us, if only for an instant, separating us from our emotional entanglement to a situation. And in that separation, we can gain a clear insight, clear perspective. Enough light can shine in for us to just think differently and consider a new alternative, creative solution to what crazy, stressful problem we might be experiencing. So this conversation with Steve was a really important one for me personally. I feel like I got a lot out of it, and I feel like I have been reflecting on this conversation with Steve since we had it several weeks ago. There are a lot of great takeaways that I gained, like I said. For one, that is some valuable knowledge and information is regarding the physiologic power of a good laugh. And a good laugh can totally put us into that relaxation response where our body is healing. That's the matter of the fact, is a good laugh is the antidote to stress, because stress is like that constriction, it's that tension, and a good laugh just relaxes all of our muscles, our blood vessels dilate. And so this conversation is full of a lot of good laughs. If you are in a place where you enjoy a good laugh, I'd point you to this one to listen in on. And we also talk about how miracles can take place when we do shift our perspective. And by miracles, I mean two people can come together and resolve a conflict when we just gain a little bit of perspective and see things from a new light. And comedy, like I said, is one great way of providing that alternative perspective that we see. And we also in this conversation talk about, the question, is all comedy always good? Well, of course not. There are times where comedy is inappropriate, and it's important to be, it's important to know where those boundaries lie and be respectful of that. And like I said, good stuff with Steve Behrman. If you're up for a good laugh, would definitely point you in the direction of alter.health/episode 48. And that brings us to episode number 50, which was with Dr. Joel Fuhrman, the nutritarian expert, the man who actually coined the term nutritarian. And for those of you who don't know what a nutritarian is, it's someone who eats foods based on nutrient content, or who follows the nutritarian equation, rather, which is health equals nutrients over calories. So what I take that to mean is that every meal is in fact an opportunity to nourish oneself. And obviously, if health equals nutrients over calories, we want foods that are nutrient dense and calorie poor or calorie deficient. And things like and foods that are nutrient dense and calorie weak are things like plants, of course, and specifically green vegetables and beans and mushrooms and onions and berries and nuts and seeds, which are what he says are G bombs, which are the most health promoting anti-cancer foods that exist: greens, beans, onions, mushrooms, berries, and seeds. And we talk about how a nutritarian diet is so much more powerful than any drug that could ever be designed or made available by any pharmaceutical industry. And the reason why that is, of course, is because when we change our relationship to food and how we eat, we change all of the underlying causes that cause all of the chronic diseases that plague modern society today. Obviously, the real solution to the health epidemic that we're all faced with is changing our lifestyle. And that's one thing that Dr. Fuhrman promotes. Obviously, he walks the walk and he talks the talk, and he is full of all sorts of knowledge and experience, witnessed, thousands of healing miracles, and he is doing such incredible work at his new Eat to Live retreat outside of San Diego, California, which is an inpatient retreat center where people go to heal, and they heal with food, of course. And in this conversation, it was just absolutely jam-packed with information. Some things that I learned were regard to weight loss and specifically like food addiction, and how the addiction to food can be so strong, and the only way to break that addiction is to eat differently. We need to start flooding the body with nutrients in order to actually feel satiated. Probably heard the term overfed and undernourished, and this is exactly what I'm talking about. We need to be overnourished, and then we need to have a micronutrient excess in order to finally break free from the addictive patterns and tendencies that are involved with obesity and weight gain, and also all the chronic diseases that are so prevalent in today's society. So really good and important information with Dr. Joel Fuhrman. And like I said, he's doing great work in San Diego at the Eat to Live retreat. And if you'd like to learn more about Dr. Fuhrman, if you don't already know about Dr. Fuhrman and you'd like to learn more, go ahead and listen to this one, alter.health/episode 50. All right, so those were the last 14 interviews that I've conducted on the Alter Your Health podcast, episodes 22 to episode 50. Obviously, last week, episode 52, was the first 14 interviews that I conducted on the podcast. These are the last 14. And from now going forward, we're going to go back into some interviews with all sorts of interesting and knowledgeable people who have, content to offer and information to offer that point us continuously in the direction of understanding of holistic health. We will, of course, be continuing the Alter Your Health live episodes, which take place on Facebook and Instagram. If you want to tune in live and participate in those conversations with me and Dr. Susanna, you can obviously do so, and they will continue to be made available on this podcast as well. And if you are enjoying this podcast, I would just really be grateful and appreciative if you could rate, subscribe, review, and share it with anyone who might be benefited from hearing all sorts of good health promoting vibes and information. And feedback is always welcome if you have any constructive or destructive, kind or harsh feedback. I would be grateful for any words of feedback, and you can do that privately with an email at info@alter.health, or you can just leave a rating or review or feedback in that way as well. So that's it for this week, and thanks again for tuning in. Thanks for your attention, and look forward to our scheduled program returning to you next week. Take care, peace and love. Bye-bye.